Imagine the largest amphibious operation the world had ever seen, set against the scorching deserts and rugged coasts of North Africa. On November 8, 1942, Allied forces launched Operation Torch, marking their first major step onto African soil in World War II. This daring mission was not just about landing troops on unfamiliar shores, it was a meticulously planned gamble. A calculated risk to seize key French-controlled ports and stop the Axis powers from expanding further into the Mediterranean and the Middle East. For months, planners in Washington and London worked tirelessly, coordinating American and British forces across thousands of miles, orchestrating naval convoys, air cover, and ground assaults with a level of precision that had never been attempted before. The stakes were enormous. If the operation failed, Axis forces under Rommel could push unchecked toward Egypt, threatening the Suez Canal and cutting off vital Allied supply routes. Success, however, promised a turning point, a chance to shift momentum in favor of the Allies and secure a foothold that would be essential for future operations in Europe. As the sun rose over the Atlantic, hundreds of ships carrying thousands of soldiers, sailors, and Marines cut through the waves, protected by warships and aircraft. On board, excitement and anxiety mingled in equal measure. Soldiers wrote letters to loved ones, wondering if they would see home again, while thinking about the mission ahead, landing on hostile beaches, facing entrenched defenders, and pushing inland into unknown terrain. Meanwhile, behind doors, commanders coordinated every movement with painstaking attention, ensuring that the elements of surprise, speed, and coordination would give their forces the edge against well-prepared opponents. Operation Torch was more than a battle plan. It was a statement of Allied resolve. It symbolized the first time that American and British forces would fight side by side in such a massive operation, demonstrating cooperation that would define the rest of the war. Every landing craft, every paratrooper drop, every coordinated artillery strike was a piece of a carefully constructed puzzle, a demonstration of what could be achieved when nations united under a shared purpose. As the first troops approached the shores of Casablanca, Oran, and Algiers, the world held its breath. Would the French forces resist? Would Axis reinforcements arrive in time to halt the advance? The tension was palpable, the danger immense, but so too was the determination. Operation Torch represented not only a strategic assault but also a profound test of courage, discipline, and ingenuity. If you want to explore the thrilling story of Operation Torch, the heroism of ordinary soldiers, and the strategy that changed the course of the war, make sure to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and hit the notification bell so you do not miss any of our in-depth historical stories. Stay with us as we uncover the planning, the battles, and the incredible moments that defined this pivotal chapter in World War II. As dawn broke over the Atlantic, a hidden story was unfolding thousands of miles away from the shores where soldiers would soon fight and die. Behind the polished decks of battleships, the roar of engines, and the restless anticipation of troops crowded into landing crafts, there existed a far quieter, equally crucial drama in rooms lit by the glow of maps and the scratch of pencils on paper. This was Operation Acrobat, the code name for what the world would soon come to know as Operation Torch. And it was a story of patience, secrecy, and extraordinary collaboration. For 4 months, in the dimly lit war rooms of Washington and London, a handful of men worked around the clock, poring over intelligence reports, logistical data, and maps of a land they had never seen, plotting every detail of a campaign that would alter the course of the war. Only a few dozen people knew the full scope of the plan. And within that select circle, trust, discipline, and ingenuity were tested to their limits. The rooms were a hive of quiet intensity. American and British officers sat side by side at the same desks, navigating not only the complexities of terrain, enemy defenses, and supply lines, but also the subtle challenges of cooperation across nations and cultures. They argued and debated, sometimes heatedly, over the best approach to land troops on shores that were defended not by rumors but by soldiers who had been trained to resist any intruder. Every map was scrutinized, every convoy schedule calculated to the hour, every potential enemy reaction anticipated. The planners understood that the success of the operation depended not on brute force alone, but on precision, timing, and the element of surprise, and that even the smallest miscalculation could cost thousands of lives. Communication was tightly controlled. Reports traveled through coded messages, couriered by trusted officers, and every ship, plane, and unit moved according to schedules that were kept secret until the very last moment. The men on the ground and at sea would not know the full plan until they were en route, which was precisely the point. The secrecy was painstakingly maintained because the slightest leak could alert the Axis powers, giving Rommel and his commanders precious time to reinforce positions in North Africa, and potentially change the outcome of the entire Mediterranean campaign. For those involved in the planning, there was a constant tension between the exhilaration of shaping history and the anxiety of knowing how fragile that history could be. The work was grueling, stretching through nights and weekends, and men grew to know each other in ways that forged bonds as strong as any forged in battle. In the quiet moments between calculations and strategy sessions, they shared stories of home, of childhood memories, and of loved ones they would not see for months, sometimes years. These moments of humanity punctuated the enormity of their task, reminding them why they labored in secrecy, why the countless hours and sleepless nights were worth every ounce of effort. Each plan drawn, each logistic route calculated, each contingency prepared was infused with an understanding that they were shaping the fate not only of thousands of soldiers, but of nations and continents. By the time the first ships began their journey across the Atlantic, the operation had transformed from a series of sketches on paper into a living, breathing force, ready to move across thousands of miles of ocean and confront an enemy entrenched in both geography and ideology. Troops who had trained for months were stepping into landing crafts, unaware of the full orchestration that had brought them to that moment. Aircraft were loaded and fueled to the brim, ready to provide cover, reconnaissance, and support, following flight paths plotted with military precision months earlier in the rooms of secrecy. Every move had been timed to coordinate with other units hundreds of miles away, to ensure that when the moment arrived, the combined power of American, British, and French forces would strike as one. The careful secrecy of Operation Acrobat was not simply about military prudence. It was a psychological shield, a way to instill confidence and discipline. Soldiers who trusted in a plan they only partially understood were nevertheless able to act decisively because the leaders above them had anticipated the chaos of war. They understood that in battle, clarity of purpose mattered more than clarity of knowledge, and that courage often required following instructions without full awareness of the grand design. And so, as the first waves approached the beaches of Casablanca, Oran, and Algiers, the culmination of months of hidden labor, every movement from the signal flags hoisted on French ships to the paratroopers dropping into unknown fields was the result of meticulous calculation and quiet heroism far from the front lines. In those rooms, the planners had not only anticipated enemy action, but had also imagined the human dimension of the invasion. The fear and courage of the soldiers landing on hostile shores, the hesitation and loyalty of French forces torn between Vichy commands and the hope of eventual liberation, the civilians caught in the currents of history. They understood that strategy was more than a matter of tanks and artillery. It was a measure of human endurance, adaptability, and moral resolve. When the first gunfire erupted, and chaos erupted along the beaches, The invisible work of Operation Acrobat ensured that the chaos was manageable, that the soldiers had a path to follow, and that the overarching goal securing North Africa and opening a new front against the Axis remained achievable. Looking back, the brilliance of the operation was not only in its execution but in its conception. 4 months of secrecy, planning, and meticulous coordination had created a force that could move across oceans, strike with precision, and achieve victory against a formidable enemy. It was a testament to the power of preparation, trust, and collaboration, and a reminder that history is often shaped as much in quiet rooms as on blazing battlefields. For those who watch the story unfold today, it is a chance to witness not only the drama of war, but also the extraordinary human endeavor that made it possible. As the plans for Operation Acrobat, the hidden blueprint behind what would become Operation Torch, took shape, the story of cooperation between the United States and Britain unfolded in ways that would redefine modern warfare. It was not merely a matter of sending troops and equipment across the Atlantic, but of forging an intricate network of coordination, a seamless fusion of two nations' military cultures, philosophies, and strategies. In the dimly lit planning rooms of Washington and London, American and British officers sat side by side at long wooden tables, their faces illuminated by the soft glow of lamps as they traced lines on maps and compared intelligence reports that had been painstakingly gathered over months. There, over countless hours of dialogue, debate, and revision, the contours of an unprecedented joint operation were formed, and the bonds between these men became as important as the plans themselves. The complexity of coordinating two separate military hierarchies, each with its own traditions, doctrines, and chains of command, cannot be overstated. Yet the officers involved in the planning of Torch discovered a shared commitment to the mission that transcended national identity. They argued fiercely over the placement of troops, the timing of convoys, and the allocation of naval and air resources, but every disagreement was underscored by mutual respect. One officer might insist on a particular route for supply ships based on logistical considerations, while another would counter with intelligence about enemy patrols or terrain obstacles. And through this tension emerged a synthesis of ideas that was far stronger than any single perspective could have produced alone. The process was exhausting, sometimes maddening, but it was necessary, for the operation depended not on a single brilliance but on the intricate interweaving of countless small decisions. Even as they worked on paper, the officers were constantly mindful of the human dimension of the campaign. Troops in thousands of ships and aircraft thousands of miles away would be acting on these plans, often with incomplete information, trusting that every detail had been considered. They had to anticipate not only the enemy's actions but also the fatigue, fear, and uncertainty that soldiers would inevitably face as they approached unfamiliar shores under heavy fire. The planners recognized that success would require more than superior firepower. It demanded timing, coordination, and the quiet confidence that comes from knowing that every element of the operation had been thought through, debated, and cross-checked across national boundaries. The logistics alone presented a formidable challenge. Troops, vehicles, artillery, and supplies had to be moved across oceans, then distributed precisely to meet the operational schedule, with contingencies for storms, mechanical failures, or enemy interception. The officers pored over timetables for convoys, ensuring that landing crafts would arrive in sequence, that air cover would coincide with the first waves, and that the bombardments from naval guns would soften resistance without endangering friendly forces. Every scenario was considered. If a beachhead proved more heavily defended than expected, what backup could be deployed? If French forces, uncertain of their loyalties, delayed cooperation, How could the Allies respond without turning a political challenge into a military disaster? The answers were worked out not in isolation, but through relentless collaboration, with each officer contributing his expertise while respecting the judgment of his colleagues. At the same time, the partnership forged in these planning rooms extended beyond strategy and logistics. It was a human alliance, formed under intense pressure, that would later translate directly into battlefield effectiveness. Officers who had argued over maps now trusted each other to command units under fire. Intelligence officers who had spent nights decoding reports relied on their counterparts to relay crucial information at the right moment. The planning sessions became exercises in patience and diplomacy as well as military acumen, because even a single miscommunication could have catastrophic consequences once the operation was underway. These men learned to anticipate not only the enemy but each other. Predicting decisions. Understanding preferences, and integrating disparate approaches into a coherent plan that functioned like clockwork. This collaboration also created a framework for improvisation once the operation moved from the maps to the beaches of North Africa. While the plans were detailed and comprehensive, no map could perfectly capture the reality of enemy resistance. Weather conditions, or the morale of soldiers landing under fire. The officers' close working relationships allowed for rapid adjustments in the field. American and British commanders could communicate efficiently, combine units when necessary, and redistribute supplies or reinforcements without delay, because they had already internalized each other's methods and expectations during months of planning. The meticulous joint preparation provided a foundation upon which flexibility could be safely exercised, turning uncertainty into manageable risk rather than chaos. By the time the convoy set sail, carrying tens of thousands of men across the Atlantic, the fruits of this collaboration were already evident. Every soldier, sailor, and pilot was about to become part of a grand design that was the product of hundreds of decisions, debates, and compromises. The success of Operation Torch would not rest solely on courage in battle, but on the invisible threads of coordination woven months earlier in planning rooms, where officers from two nations had learned to speak a common language of strategy, logistics, and trust. This alliance of minds, painstakingly built in secrecy, ensured that when the first landing crafts approached the shores of Casablanca, Oran, and Algiers, the troops could act decisively, the bombardments could be timed perfectly, and the complex dance of air, land, and sea could unfold with precision. The story of WWII and British coordination in Torch is, therefore, more than a tale of maps and orders. It is a story of collaboration, adaptability, and shared purpose under pressure. It illustrates how human ingenuity and cooperation can transform planning into action, and how trust forged in quiet rooms can become the backbone of victory on chaotic battlefields. In this meticulous intertwining of strategies, logistics, and personalities, one can see the true power of partnership, where the union of two nations' forces produced an outcome far greater than the sum of its parts, setting the stage for a campaign that would change the course of the war forever. As the meticulously drawn plans of Operation Acrobat moved from the realm of maps and war rooms into the physical world, the scale of the undertaking became breathtakingly apparent. Hundreds of ships, bristling with soldiers, artillery, vehicles, and supplies, began to gather along the coasts of the United States and Britain, forming armadas whose size and complexity seemed almost unimaginable. Each vessel had been assigned a precise role within a larger choreography. Troop transports would carry men to the beaches. Supply ships would ensure that they would not run short of food, ammunition, or medical aid, and warships, equipped with heavy artillery, would patrol the flanks and guard against any enemy interception. Aircraft from carriers and airfields were loaded and fueled, ready to provide cover. Reconnaissance and tactical strikes. Their presence a vital shield for the vulnerable ships below, yet despite every calculation, every precaution, the journey across thousands of miles of ocean was fraught with danger. And at any moment, disaster could strike. The convoy set sail under a mixture of tension and excitement that gripped both sailors and soldiers. Below deck, troops adjusted to the cramped, swaying quarters, writing letters to loved ones or sharing quiet jokes to keep morale high. Some watched the horizon for the first sight of whales or flying fish. Others tried to imagine what awaited them on distant shores they had only studied on maps. On deck, the hum of engines mingled with the cries of officers issuing orders, and the rhythm of daily routines created a sense of order amidst the vast uncertainty. Every movement was part of an orchestrated effort, a living testament to months of planning, coordination, and relentless attention to detail. As the ships left port, naval fleets moved into formation, creating a protective screen around the convoys that extended miles in every direction. Battleships, cruisers, and destroyers flanked the transports, ready to repel any attack, while aircraft flew in patrol patterns above, scanning for submarines or enemy reconnaissance planes. The coordination required was extraordinary. Signals had to be precise, timing exact, and every captain and commander needed to understand his position within the larger strategy. Even minor deviations could risk collisions, delays, or exposure to enemy fire, and the constant vigilance required of all personnel created an atmosphere of relentless tension. For the soldiers, the journey was both exhausting and transformative. They had trained extensively for landings and assaults. Yet the reality of crossing vast oceans in tightly packed vessels under the ever-present threat of attack was unlike anything they had experienced. Conversations often turned to home, to the families and towns left behind, to the friends and comrades who would share the coming battles. Yet even in these moments of longing, there was a shared sense of purpose. Each man knew that his role, no matter how small it seemed in the enormity of the operation, was essential. Every supply crate, every artillery shell, every ration was part of a network designed to ensure that when they finally touched North African shores, they could fight effectively and decisively. The journey was not without incident. Storms could batter the convoys, waves could crash over decks, and mechanical failures threatened to delay the meticulously timed landings. Communication lines were tested as signals had to travel between ships, aircraft, and command centers, ensuring that every element moved in harmony. In these moments, the months of joint planning between American and British officers proved invaluable. The officers at sea and in the air had internalized the logic of the operation, allowing them to adapt to unforeseen circumstances without losing cohesion or endangering the mission. It was a testament to the foresight and discipline that had guided every stage of preparation. The convoys also symbolized a broader alliance. Soldiers from across the United States, Britain, and even other allied nations shared these crowded vessels, exchanging stories, techniques, and camaraderie. The journey itself became an incubator of unity, as men of different backgrounds and experiences came to understand one another, forming bonds that would later prove vital on the battlefields of North Africa. Mutual respect and trust developed not only among officers but among the rank and file, reinforcing the idea that success would depend on coordination, cooperation, and the willingness to act as a single, unified force. As they neared the African coast, anticipation and anxiety rose to a fever pitch. Every sailor and soldier understood that the months of preparation, planning, and coordination would now be put to the ultimate test. Enemy forces were entrenched and alert, ready to contest every beach, every port, every mile of coastline. The careful secrecy of the plan, maintained for months in distant war rooms, would now be a decisive advantage, allowing the first waves to land with the element of surprise and gain the crucial initial foothold that would enable the subsequent advance inland. When the first landing craft approached the beaches of Casablanca, Oran, and Algiers, the culmination of months of labor, coordination, and human effort became tangible. Soldiers braced themselves for resistance. Yet every movement, the positioning of troops, the cover provided by naval gunfire, the timing of air support was informed by the invisible hand of planning that had guided the convoys across the Atlantic. The journey had been long, dangerous, and exhausting, but it had also transformed a disparate group of men and ships into a coherent force capable of executing one of the most complex and amphibious operations in history. The story of this transatlantic voyage is a story of precision, endurance, and collaboration. It is the tale of hundreds of ships, thousands of men, and countless hours of planning converging into a single, decisive moment that would shape the course of the war. The risks were enormous, the uncertainties many, yet the determination, discipline, and ingenuity of the Allied forces turned the crossing of oceans into the prelude of victory. It was not merely a passage across water, but the movement of history itself, as men and machines sailed together toward a destiny they had meticulously prepared for, bound by shared purpose and unwavering resolve. As the first landing crafts neared the sun-scorched beaches of North Africa, a tense silence seemed to hang over the restless waters, broken only by the rhythmic thrum of engines and the distant roar of naval artillery preparing to soften resistance. Soldiers, packed tightly in the steel-hulled vessels, gripped their rifles and braced against the motion of the waves, hearts pounding with anticipation and fear, knowing that the next hours would define not only their courage, but the fate of an entire theater of war. Casablanca, Oran, and Algiers lay ahead, each port a strategic prize, a gateway through which the Allies could secure a foothold in North Africa and begin to shift the balance of power in the Mediterranean. Months of planning, endless hours of preparation, and thousands of miles of perilous sailing had all led to this singular, pivotal moment. And now the culmination of Operation Torch hung in the balance, fragile and electric. The beaches themselves were lined with defenses, remnants of a French garrison whose loyalties were tangled in the complex political web of Vichy France. They had been trained and armed by the same nation whose forces the Allies were determined to resist. Yet the men on the sand were caught between duty and the reality of an enemy whose intentions were far from purely destructive. As the first troops set foot on the course, sun warmed, initial volleys of gunfire erupted from bunkers and fortified positions, a sharp reminder that even in a war fought on distant continents, human instincts for survival and defense were ever present. The soldiers, moving in well-practiced formations, returned fire with a mixture of disciplined precision and adrenaline-fueled urgency, their training guiding every step even as uncertainty rippled through the ranks. Yet beneath the roar of battle, a subtler dynamic began to unfold, one that would reveal the unique complexities of this campaign. The French forces, while initially resisting, were not nazis. They were men torn between allegiance and pragmatism, aware that the Allies' arrival did not necessarily spell the end of their nation or their personal survival. Radio messages crackled across the lines, conveying the instructions of Allied commanders who sought not merely to defeat but to persuade, to show that surrender could be honorable, and that cooperation did not entail betrayal of their country. "We are not here to fight you as enemies," the messages stressed. "You are not nazis. You are soldiers who may yet become our allies." This delicate negotiation of human psychology and military strategy proved as crucial as the naval bombardments and airborne assaults. A reminder that in war, victory is often as much a matter of understanding hearts as it is of overpowering force. As the morning sun rose higher, painting the waters in shades of gold and cobalt, the first French defenses began to falter. Units that had braced themselves for confrontation now weighed the cost of continued resistance against the assurances being offered. Officers, in rapid discussions under the whir of planes and the smoke of distant explosions, relayed the promises of human treatment and honorable surrender. And gradually, a wave of compliance swept through the ranks. Men who had fired with determination now lowered their weapons, stepping forward not as defeated enemies but as soldiers recognizing a larger strategic reality. Their hands raised in a gesture of cautious trust. The scene was a mixture of tension and relief, a quiet triumph that contrasted with the chaos still unfolding along other stretches of coastline. In Casablanca, the landing continued with both drama and careful negotiation, as Allied forces moved to secure the port while simultaneously coordinating with French officers willing to cooperate. Tanks rolled ashore behind the infantry, their treads carving paths through sand softened by recent rains, while artillery units established positions to provide cover against any remaining pockets of resistance. The air was filled with the steady hum of reconnaissance planes circling overhead, their cameras capturing the unfolding operations and relaying real-time intelligence to commanders. Even as pockets of French troops engaged briefly, the combination of disciplined strategy, careful communication, and psychological acuity ensured that outright casualties remained lower than might have been expected for such a complex landing. Meanwhile, at Oran, a similar pattern unfolded, with beachheads contested only briefly before the weight of planning, coordination, and persuasive negotiation encouraged surrender. Soldiers moved through the streets, securing key installations and ensuring that logistical pathways were cleared. Their focus split between establishing control and maintaining order, for the Allies understood that winning the territory also meant earning the cooperation of local forces and minimizing civilian suffering. Artillery fire, which had been prepared for worst-case scenarios, was now largely restrained, a tool of leverage rather than indiscriminate destruction, highlighting the sophistication and restraint that characterized this operation. Algiers, the third major landing site, presented its own challenges, yet the unfolding events mirrored those at Casablanca and Oran. Initial resistance was met with coordinated assaults from sea and air, and simultaneously with careful outreach to French officers, demonstrating a dual approach of strength and diplomacy. Men who had expected only to fight found themselves negotiating, observing, and sometimes guiding their temporary allies in the complex dance of shifting allegiances. The streets, though initially tense with anticipation of urban combat, gradually became avenues of collaboration, a living illustration of how meticulous planning, psychological insight, and the judicious use of force could achieve objectives with efficiency and minimal unnecessary bloodshed. By the end of the first day, the beaches of North Africa had become a tableau of strategic success, a testament to the power of preparation and the importance of understanding the human dimensions of conflict. French forces, once poised to resist, were now integrated into a broader Allied framework, their surrender not a humiliation but a pragmatic recognition of the larger goals at stake. Troops from the United States and Britain moved with confidence, consolidating positions, securing ports, and preparing for the next phase of the campaign inland, fully aware that the seemingly simple act of landing had required extraordinary coordination, courage, and insight. The landings at Casablanca, Oran, and Algiers thus stand as a remarkable episode in military history, demonstrating that even amid the chaos and danger of war, strategy, empathy, and careful communication can convert potential conflict into controlled, decisive action. The courage of the men who stormed the beaches, the meticulous planning of officers who coordinated across continents, and the nuanced handling of French forces combined to create a narrative of success that extended beyond mere military conquest, revealing the profound impact of preparation, human understanding, and disciplined execution in the face of immense uncertainty and risk. As the beaches of North Africa slowly transformed from chaotic landing zones into tenuous footholds, another critical dimension of Operation Torch came into play, one that would prove decisive in shaping the trajectory of the campaign: the airborne operations. High above the sun-baked coastlines, paratroopers and aircraft crews prepared for missions that demanded not only precision but courage under extreme uncertainty. For in the skies over Casablanca, Oran, and Algiers, the line between strategic brilliance and catastrophic failure was thin and perilous. Months of planning had anticipated the necessity of controlling the air, not merely to protect the convoys at sea, but to ensure that once troops had landed, they would have a decisive advantage against enemy forces holding inland positions, particularly key airfields that could either enable or obstruct the momentum of the Allied advance. From the moment the first transport planes roared into the early morning skies, carrying paratroopers toward their drop zones, the operation took on a new level of complexity and dynamism. Soldiers who had trained for months on mock airfields now felt the visceral reality of jumping from aircraft thousands of feet above hostile terrain, their canopies opening with a sudden, almost surreal jolt, and the ground below a patchwork of sand, scrub, and fortified enemy positions. Each paratrooper carried not only weapons and supplies but also the weight of expectation, knowing that their successful landing and rapid consolidation of key positions would enable armored units and infantry to push inland with reduced resistance. The descent was punctuated by the roar of engines, the clatter of equipment, and the nervous tension of men who had rehearsed extensively yet could never fully predict what awaited them on the ground. Simultaneously, strategic air forces unleashed a coordinated array of operations designed to dominate the skies and provide essential support for the advancing ground troops. Bombers swept along predetermined flight paths, targeting enemy positions, artillery emplacements, and infrastructure, while fighter planes engaged any opposition that dared to rise. Reconnaissance aircraft relayed real-time intelligence back to commanders, allowing adjustments to be made with a speed and accuracy that would have been unimaginable in earlier conflicts. The synergy between paratroopers, bombers, and fighter escorts demonstrated an evolution in military doctrine. Air power was no longer a peripheral adjunct but a central instrument in shaping outcomes on land. Every sortie, every calculated bomb drop, and every skirmish in the air had immediate implications for the soldiers struggling through sand and mud below, creating a network of support that turned the tide in favor of the Allies even before the main confrontations on the beaches reached their climax. As paratroopers secured airfields, the rhythm of battle transformed. Once hostile zones became hubs of activity where supplies could be flown in, reinforcements could land, and air cover could be extended further inland. The capture of these key positions allowed armored divisions to move with greater speed, tanks to be refueled and rearmed, and artillery units to establish forward-firing positions that could threaten enemy concentrations and disrupt counterattacks. It was a delicate balance. Too slow, and the enemy could regroup. Too aggressive, and advancing units risked overextension. Yet the careful orchestration of air and ground elements, honed through months of joint planning, ensured that each movement reinforced the other, creating a seamless chain of operational effectiveness that amplified the impact of every soldier, every tank, and every aircraft in the field. The psychological effect of these airborne operations was equally significant. Enemy forces, previously confident in their entrenched positions, found themselves exposed to attacks from above and below simultaneously, a constant pressure that eroded morale and created confusion in command structures. Soldiers who had braced for conventional land assaults now faced a multidimensional threat, one in which retreat or resistance carried heightened risk. Conversely, Allied troops on the ground drew inspiration and confidence from the presence of friendly aircraft overhead, their movements synchronized with the precise timing of airstrikes and supply drops, creating a sense of invincibility born from coordination and preparedness. Communication networks, painstakingly established between paratroopers, ground forces, and air controllers, allowed for adjustments in real time, a feat of logistics and strategy that showcased the evolving sophistication of modern warfare. The airborne component of Operation Torch was also remarkable for its human stories, small narratives of courage and ingenuity that collectively shaped the larger outcome. Men who had never met before found themselves relying on one another in life or death moments, improvising solutions to unexpected obstacles. Whether it was clearing debris from a landing zone, neutralizing hidden enemy positions, or guiding reinforcements through unfamiliar terrain. Planes that had been brought across the Atlantic, assembled, and readied for combat now became lifelines, delivering essential supplies, medical aid, and tactical intelligence to units often operating far from established bases. Each successful drop reinforced the strategic vision of the planners. Control of the air meant freedom of movement on the ground, and freedom of movement meant that the Allies could sustain the momentum that was crucial for success in a theater where timing, geography, and coordination were all inextricably linked. Even as the initial waves of paratroopers faced the chaos of landings, the ongoing sorties of bombers and fighters maintained a relentless pressure on enemy forces, disrupting reinforcements and supply lines while providing a protective umbrella for vulnerable columns advancing toward inland objectives. Engineers and logistics personnel moved swiftly to consolidate captured airfields, creating makeshift runways and storage areas that allowed aircraft to operate closer to the front lines, reducing turnaround times and increasing the tempo of operations. The interplay of human skill, mechanical ingenuity, and tactical vision created a dynamic battlefield in which success was measured not only in territorial gains but in the ability to maintain initiative, surprise, and flexibility in the face of an adversary that had previously seemed unassailable. As the operation progressed, the combined effect of paratrooper landings and air support became evident in the increasingly rapid advance of ground forces. Tanks, infantry, and artillery moved inland with coordination that reflected the seamless integration of air and ground strategy. Enemy units found themselves encircled, harried, and increasingly demoralized, unable to mount an effective counterattack against an adversary who now controlled both the terrain and the skies. The synergy between airborne and ground elements underscored the transformative power of well-planned joint operations, demonstrating that the future of warfare lay not in isolated engagements but in the orchestration of multiple dimensions of combat, each reinforcing and amplifying the others. The story of paratroopers and air forces in Operation Torch is one of courage, precision, and innovation. It illustrates how control of the air can dictate outcomes on land, how careful planning can convert risk into advantage, and how the bravery of individual soldiers, working in concert with complex technology and strategy, can change the course of a campaign. From the initial drops over hostile territory to the consolidation of captured airfields and the relentless support of advancing ground forces. The airborne component exemplified the meticulous execution and human determination that turned a daring amphibious assault into a pivotal moment in the North African theater, laying the foundation for subsequent victories and the eventual liberation of the region from Axis control. with the beaches firmly under Allied control and the skies dominated by paratroopers and air forces. The next phase of Operation Torch unfolded as soldiers, tanks, and artillery pushed inland, navigating a landscape that was as unforgiving as the enemy they confronted. For the deserts and mountains of North Africa were no mere backdrop, but formidable adversaries in their own right. Each advance carried the weight of months of preparation, and yet the terrain was relentless, with shifting sands, rocky ridges, and narrow passes that funneled troops into predictable paths where German and Italian forces lay in wait, determined to blunt the momentum of the invading armies. As columns of Allied forces surged forward from Casablanca, Oran, and Algiers, they were met with coordinated counterattacks, mechanized units moving with precision, and artillery shells bursting among the ranks, reminding every soldier that victory would not come from courage alone, but from the careful orchestration of logistics, engineering, and relentless determination. Supply lines became lifelines in this vast and challenging theater, threading hundreds of miles across desert expanses, linking improvised ports to forward positions, and allowing the constant flow of ammunition, food, fuel, and medical supplies that sustained the offensive. Convoys of trucks and jeeps moved day and night under the protection of scouting units and air cover, navigating treacherous terrain while evading enemy fire and ambushes. Engineers labored tirelessly alongside combat units, constructing roads across sand and rock, erecting bridges over arid wadis, and repairing rail lines that had been damaged or destroyed. Their work often carried out under intermittent shelling and air raids. These efforts were invisible to many but essential. Without the ability to maintain momentum, even the bravest assault could falter, and the well-drilled German and Italian forces were quick to exploit any pause or gap in supply. As Allied forces advanced toward strategic objectives, the fighting intensified, with enemy armor and infantry mounting determined resistance, often exploiting natural choke points such as mountain passes or narrow valleys where advancing troops could be targeted by artillery and machine gun nests. Yet the Allies had learned from earlier engagements, coordinating combined arms tactics that integrated infantry, armor, artillery, and air support in fluid, adaptable formations. Tank units moved in tandem with infantry, covering flanks and suppressing enemy positions, while artillery barrages softened fortified points in advance, allowing troops to consolidate gains without becoming exposed to counterattacks. Above them, aircraft continued to provide reconnaissance, close air support, and interdiction, striking at supply convoys, command posts, and reinforcements, effectively isolating German and Italian units from their logistical lifelines and diminishing their capacity to respond effectively to the Allied advance. The human element remained at the forefront of this struggle, for soldiers and officers alike were constantly adapting to the unpredictable nature of desert warfare. Men who had endured long marches through dust and heat now faced the psychological strain of knowing that at any moment, enemy tanks could emerge over a dune crest or artillery could rain destruction from unseen positions. Communications between units were vital, often maintained under difficult conditions, with signals officers and runners bridging gaps where radio lines faltered. Engineers worked alongside combatants, constructing defensive positions and maintaining supply routes even as the front lines shifted daily. A delicate balance of offensive momentum and defensive caution that required constant vigilance and judgment. Throughout the campaign, individual stories of courage and ingenuity emerged, illustrating the intersection of human perseverance and strategic necessity. Soldiers improvised bridges using local materials to enable tanks and artillery to traverse otherwise impassable terrain. Medics navigated the chaos of shellfire and small arms engagements to reach the wounded, and supply drivers maneuvered their trucks through bombed-out roads under the threat of ambush, each action contributing to the overall success of the operation. These personal efforts, often unnoticed in broader accounts of battles, were essential to sustaining the offensive, ensuring that forward units could continue to press the attack and maintain pressure on enemy forces. The enemy, meanwhile, employed every tactic available to slow the Allied advance. German and Italian commanders executed counterattacks with disciplined precision, striking at exposed flanks, attempting to cut supply lines, and forcing engagements in terrain advantageous to their defensive positions. They relied on their familiarity with the local geography and the speed of mechanized units to counterbalance the overwhelming numerical and logistical advantages of the Allies. Yet for every maneuver the Axis powers executed, the combined coordination of Allied forces' air support, ground assaults, engineering ingenuity, and logistical foresight countered with adaptability and resilience, gradually wearing down resistance and consolidating gains across multiple fronts. In the face of these challenges, the Allied command structure proved remarkably flexible, allowing subordinate commanders to make real-time decisions that integrated intelligence, terrain, and enemy activity. The coordination of engineers, logistics teams, and combat units enabled simultaneous advances along multiple axes, preventing the enemy from concentrating their forces at a single point and reducing the risk of encirclement or stagnation. Forward airfields, captured earlier by paratroopers, allowed fighter planes and bombers to operate closer to the front lines, providing timely support and rapidly responding to evolving threats. Supply convoys, guided by meticulous planning and the courage of drivers and escorts, maintained a flow of resources that kept tanks operational. Artillery firing, and soldiers fed and equipped even in remote and hostile environments. As the campaign progressed, it became clear that the success of the Allied push inland relied not only on brute force, but on the interplay of strategy, logistics, and human endurance. Each advance was the culmination of careful planning, relentless execution, and the ability to adapt to the unpredictable realities of desert warfare. Troops moving across the sands and mountains were sustained by the unheralded but indispensable work of engineers, supply officers, and planners who ensured that weapons, fuel, and provisions arrived where and when they were needed, enabling the continued pressure on enemy forces and the gradual unraveling of their defensive lines. By the time key objectives were reached, the combined effect of sustained supply, engineering ingenuity, and coordinated operations had transformed the campaign into a display of operational art, where momentum, flexibility, and the integration of multiple arms of warfare dictated success. The Allied advance, though challenged at every step by German and Italian counterattacks, demonstrated that victory in North Africa would not be won by heroism alone but by the meticulous orchestration of logistics, engineering, and human determination, each reinforcing the other in a complex, ever-shifting battlefield that demanded both courage and precision. Through this intricate dance of strategy, resilience, and adaptation, the inland campaign of Operation Torch stands as a testament to the importance of logistics and engineering in modern warfare, illustrating that the tide of battle is often turned not solely by combat prowess but by the capacity to sustain, adapt, and advance in the face of relentless opposition, ensuring that every soldier, vehicle, and aircraft could contribute to the ultimate goal of securing North Africa and setting the stage for further Allied operations in the Mediterranean theater. As the Allied push inland gained momentum, the strategic vision of Operation Torch revealed its full scope in a display of coordination and precision that would become a defining hallmark of the campaign. For the objective was not merely to advance linearly across the North African terrain, but to envelop and neutralize Axis forces through a carefully orchestrated encirclement that leveraged the combined might of air, land, and naval power in a synchronized symphony of military ingenuity. Months of meticulous planning, intelligence gathering, and joint exercises culminated in a multi-directional offensive in which each component ground troops, armored divisions, paratroopers, artillery units, fighter aircraft, and naval gunfire worked in concert to compress enemy formations into ever-tightening pockets, denying them freedom of maneuver and constricting the lifelines upon which their operational effectiveness depended. From the earliest hours of the operation, Allied commanders understood that achieving a decisive victory required more than frontal assaults. It necessitated enveloping the enemy from multiple vectors simultaneously, creating a scenario in which retreat or reinforcement became exceedingly difficult. Along the Mediterranean coast, naval forces patrolled aggressively, their presence not only protecting the flanks of advancing columns, but also interdicting supplies and preventing the escape of Axis units to more favorable positions, while artillery and armored divisions moved inland, seizing high ground and establishing forward positions from which they could exert control over key roads, passes, and communication hubs. The air campaign mirrored these movements with relentless precision, as bombers and fighter bombers struck strategic points, targeted supply depots, and interdicted reinforcements, all the while providing reconnaissance that allowed commanders on the ground to adjust maneuvers in real time, anticipating enemy reactions before they could be fully executed. In the heart of this complex operational web, ground troops found themselves advancing not just against the enemy, but within an intricate choreography that demanded coordination across vast distances and diverse terrain. Infantry units moved through narrow valleys and desert expanses, often in the presence of formidable resistance, while armored divisions flanked and enveloped, executing pincer movements designed to drive Axis forces toward positions already threatened by air and naval fire. Supply convoys, stretched thin across hundreds of miles, carried essential ammunition, fuel, and medical resources, their safe passage crucial for maintaining momentum and ensuring that every advance could be sustained. For in such a high-tempo operation, even minor disruptions in logistics could have cascading consequences, slowing assaults and exposing units to counterattacks. The encirclement strategy was as much psychological as it was tactical, for Axis soldiers, confronted simultaneously by advances from multiple directions, constant bombardment from the air, and the looming presence of naval fire along coastal routes, experienced a mounting sense of isolation and inevitability. Their defensive positions, previously fortified against conventional assaults, now seemed increasingly vulnerable as gaps appeared in their lines and retreat routes were cut off. The psychological strain on commanders and soldiers alike was immense, as they grappled with the realization that the enemy's ability to maneuver, resupply, and reinforce had been systematically degraded. In contrast, Allied forces, aware of the larger operational design, drew confidence from the visible effects of their combined efforts, understanding that each advance, each airstrike, and each captured position contributed to a tightening noose that would ultimately neutralize the opposition. The execution of this encirclement required constant adaptation. For terrain, weather, and enemy actions could disrupt even the most meticulously planned maneuvers. Engineers worked tirelessly to construct roads, bridges, and supply depots in areas previously inaccessible, enabling armored columns and artillery units to move with speed and flexibility. Air controllers and forward observers maintained continuous communication with ground forces, adjusting bombing runs and strafing attacks to synchronize with the shifting front lines, while naval units provided both fire support and logistical lifelines along the coast. The interplay of these elements created a dynamic battlefield in which timing, coordination, and situational awareness were paramount, and where the failure of any single component could compromise the integrity of the entire encirclement. As the Allied forces pressed the Axis into increasingly constricted positions, skirmishes erupted in key towns, road junctions, and mountain passes, with each engagement serving both tactical and strategic purposes. Every enemy unit forced to fight in these confined areas suffered attrition not only from direct combat but also from disrupted communications, supply shortages, and the psychological pressure of knowing that escape routes were systematically eliminated. Conversely, the Allies exploited these conditions to maximize the effect of coordinated firepower, combining artillery barrages, airstrikes, and infantry maneuvers to overwhelm pockets of resistance while maintaining overall operational tempo. The success of these operations was not simply measured by territory gained, but by the gradual but inexorable reduction of the enemy's ability to operate effectively, forcing them into defensive postures from which recovery was increasingly difficult. The encirclement also facilitated decisive engagements that would shape the remainder of the North African campaign. Once Axis units were compressed into confined areas, concentrated attacks by armored divisions and infantry allowed for the systematic neutralization of fortified positions, while air and naval forces maintained pressure, preventing regrouping or reinforcement. Forward bases, captured earlier in the campaign, now served as staging points for resupply and reinforcement, enabling the Allies to maintain an unbroken chain of operational momentum. Engineers played a critical role in ensuring that artillery and armored units could navigate difficult terrain, constructing temporary bridges and clearing obstacles to allow the full weight of the Allied assault to be brought to bear at precisely the right time. Throughout this complex maneuver, the integration of air, land, and naval assets illustrated the evolution of modern combined arms warfare, demonstrating that victory depended not merely on individual bravery or firepower, but on the ability to coordinate multiple dimensions of combat into a cohesive, mutually reinforcing strategy. The success of the encirclement underscored the value of foresight, planning, and adaptability, showing that with careful orchestration, even a well-entrenched and experienced enemy could be systematically isolated, compressed, and ultimately defeated. By the time the Axis forces found themselves fully trapped, their capacity to resist had been irreversibly weakened, and the culmination of these efforts laid the groundwork for subsequent advances, ensuring that North Africa would become a theater where Allied initiative and coordination set the stage for broader victories in the Mediterranean and beyond, a testament to the power of joint operations executed with precision, determination, and unyielding purpose. The struggle for control of North Africa reached its most intense and consequential phase as Allied forces engaged in a series of decisive battles at strategically vital locations, with Hill 609, Longstop Hill, and numerous other key positions becoming focal points where the fate of the campaign would be determined. For each hill, ridge, and pass represented not merely a geographic feature, but a gateway through which the tides of battle would flow, and controlling them was essential to sustaining the momentum of the Allied advance while simultaneously denying the enemy opportunities to regroup, reinforce, or mount counterattacks that could stall progress or even reverse hard-won gains. The planning that had guided the initial amphibious landings now extended into the detailed orchestration of attacks on these positions. Integrating infantry, armored units, artillery, and air support in a combined arms approach that exemplified the operational sophistication the Allies had developed over months of preparation and combat experience. As the battle for Hill 609 unfolded, soldiers from multiple nations converged on a landscape that was as challenging as it was critical, with rocky slopes, steep inclines, and exposed approaches leaving attacking forces vulnerable to defensive fire. Yet the attackers pressed forward, understanding that holding this hill meant controlling the surrounding valleys, roads, and lines of communication that the Axis relied upon. Artillery barrages rumbled across the landscape, meticulously coordinated to soften defensive positions before infantry and armored units advanced. And from above, Allied aircraft roared over the battlefield, their bombers and fighters targeting fortifications, troop concentrations, and supply points, creating an overwhelming convergence of firepower that gradually eroded the capacity of German and Italian units to resist effectively. Engineers worked alongside combat units to clear obstacles, construct makeshift roads, and ensure that artillery and tanks could reach positions from which their fire would have maximum impact, a critical factor in sustaining offensive pressure and preventing the defenders from regrouping or counter-attacking. Longstop Hill presented an equally formidable challenge, its elevated position offering the enemy commanding views over the approaches and surrounding terrain, making any assault perilous and requiring meticulous coordination between units. Here, the integration of air and artillery support proved essential, as bombardments suppressed enemy fire and disoriented defensive positions, allowing infantry to advance under cover and tanks to exploit gaps in the lines, often moving in zigzag patterns across exposed ground to minimize vulnerability to artillery and small arms fire. The synchronization of these elements was more than technical. It demanded continuous communication and adaptability, as commanders adjusted to unexpected resistance, shifting their tactics to capitalize on weaknesses or respond to sudden counterattacks, demonstrating that flexibility and responsiveness were as vital as firepower in achieving battlefield objectives. Throughout these engagements, the human dimension was ever present, as soldiers endured extreme physical and psychological strain while navigating terrain that was unforgiving and facing an enemy determined to defend every inch. The intensity of combat forced rapid decision-making under fire, with unit leaders coordinating movements across uneven terrain, anticipating enemy responses, and maintaining cohesion among troops who were often dispersed by artillery, mines, or natural obstacles. Medics and support personnel moved through hazardous areas to tend to the wounded, while supply teams ensured that ammunition, rations, and water reached frontline positions despite the chaos. Their efforts sustaining combat effectiveness and enabling continued pressure on the enemy. Each contribution, though sometimes invisible in broader accounts of the campaign, was integral to the ultimate success of the offensive, highlighting the interconnectedness of combat operations, logistics, and morale. As the battles progressed, Axis defenders faced relentless attrition, their numbers reduced by a combination of direct combat losses, aerial bombardments, and artillery strikes, and the psychological impact of constant pressure compounded their operational difficulties. The convergence of air, land, and artillery power created a situation in which defensive positions became untenable, forcing German and Italian units to withdraw or surrender, often after fierce resistance that underscored their discipline and tactical skill. The capture of Hill 609 and Longstop Hill not only provided strategic advantage in terms of terrain and observation but also disrupted enemy communications and supply lines, effectively isolating units and enabling subsequent advances toward Tunis and other critical objectives, demonstrating the cumulative effect of coordinated operations across multiple domains of warfare. Other strategic locations similarly became stages for intense combat, with each hill, ridge, and valley offering opportunities for both sides to influence the larger operational picture. The Allies, however, maintained the initiative, leveraging their superiority in air and artillery power to suppress defenses, support infantry maneuvers, and protect armored thrusts that penetrated enemy lines, gradually creating an operational environment in which Axis forces were compelled to fight under conditions increasingly favorable to the attackers. Engineers, reconnaissance units, and command staff worked tirelessly to maintain momentum, adapting plans in response to terrain, weather, and enemy actions, ensuring that the flow of forces and resources remained uninterrupted and that opportunities created by tactical successes were exploited before the enemy could react. The cumulative effect of these battles demonstrated the evolution of combined arms doctrine in practice, where coordination between air, land, and artillery components amplified the effectiveness of each, creating a synergistic force capable of overwhelming even well-prepared defenses. By applying sustained pressure across multiple axes, isolating enemy units, and systematically neutralizing fortified positions, the Allies transformed local tactical victories into strategic momentum, setting the stage for further advances and the eventual collapse of Axis resistance in North Africa. Through the capture of Hill 609, Longstop Hill, and other critical locations, the Allies illustrated that success in modern warfare required not only courage and tenacity, but also meticulous planning, precise coordination, and the integration of diverse combat elements into a cohesive and adaptable strategy. Each hill taken, each fortification overcome, and each enemy unit neutralized contributed to the broader objective of securing North Africa, demonstrating the power of combined operations and the importance of air and artillery superiority in shaping the outcome of battles and ultimately the course of the campaign, ensuring that Allied forces could continue their advance with confidence, momentum, and strategic clarity, poised for the challenges that lay ahead. As the dust settled over the North African deserts and the echoes of artillery fire faded into memory, the full magnitude of the Allied victory in Operation Torch became unmistakably clear. Across the sun-scorched hills, through towns scarred by combat, and along the winding roads that had once carried the lifeblood of Axis supply lines, Allied soldiers and officers surveyed a theater transformed by their relentless drive. Strategic foresight and unyielding determination. The capture of 266,000 Axis troops was not merely a numerical triumph. It represented the culmination of months of careful planning, meticulous coordination, and the courageous execution of a complex strategy that integrated air, land, and naval power in ways that had never before been attempted on such a scale. This staggering number of surrendered soldiers testified to the overwhelming pressure applied by the Allies through the encirclement, the relentless artillery barrages, and the precision strikes of aircraft that denied the enemy any respite or opportunity to regroup. The successful conclusion of the North African campaign provided far more than a temporary respite in the fight against the Axis. By securing Casablanca, Oran, Algiers, and the surrounding territories, the Allies gained access to critical ports, supply routes, and staging areas from which future operations in the Mediterranean and southern Europe could be launched with unprecedented efficiency. This achievement fundamentally altered the strategic balance in the region, opening pathways for further offensives into Tunisia, Sicily, and ultimately mainland Italy, and providing a springboard for the sustained liberation of Europe. The lessons learned in North Africa about the importance of inter-Allied cooperation, the integration of multiple branches of the military, and the challenges of logistics over long distances became invaluable guides for subsequent campaigns, ensuring that the hard-won experiences of Operation Torch could be applied to even greater endeavors in the months and years that followed. Equally significant was the demonstration of what could be accomplished when forces from different nations worked seamlessly together toward a shared objective. American and British officers, soldiers, sailors, and airmen had labored side by side, navigating differences in doctrine, equipment, and communication styles, and emerging with a coherent, highly effective fighting force capable of executing intricate maneuvers across vast distances. Paratroopers had captured critical airfields, enabling air support that was decisive for the success of ground operations, while naval units had protected convoys and provided firepower that softened enemy positions along the coast. The victories at strategic locations such as Hill 609 and Longstop Hill highlighted the efficacy of combined arms operations and illustrated how coordination, planning, and adaptability could overcome even the most entrenched and well-equipped enemy forces. The human element, too, was unforgettable, for the campaign was fought not only with technology and strategy but with courage, endurance, and sacrifice. Soldiers from a multitude of countries, including the United States, Britain, Canada, France, and others, faced grueling conditions, extreme heat, unforgiving terrain, and fierce resistance. Yet they persevered, drawing strength from camaraderie, duty, and the conviction that their efforts would shape the course of the war. Medical teams, engineers, and logistical personnel played equally vital roles, ensuring that troops remained supplied, mobile, and capable of sustaining pressure against a formidable adversary. These collective efforts forged bonds and a sense of shared purpose that would resonate throughout future Allied operations, proving that the integration of diverse human and material resources could achieve results far beyond the capabilities of any single nation acting alone. As the campaign concluded, the significance of Operation Torch extended beyond its immediate tactical and strategic gains. It marked a turning point in the Mediterranean theater, demonstrating that the Allies could project power across continents, coordinate complex amphibious and inland operations, and achieve decisive outcomes against well-entrenched Axis forces. The experience gained in North Africa about maneuver warfare, logistics, inter-allied command structures, and the integration of air, land, and sea power would inform and strengthen the campaigns that followed. From the invasion of Sicily to the liberation of Italy, and eventually the day landings in Normandy, the lessons learned, the innovations tested, and the bonds forged during this campaign created a foundation upon which future victories were built, ensuring that the Allies approached subsequent operations with confidence, preparation, and a proven methodology for success. For those of us who study these moments in history, Operation Torch stands as a testament to strategic foresight, courage, and collaboration, reminding us that even in the darkest hours, when the odds seem insurmountable, meticulous planning, determination, and the combined efforts of many can change the course of events in ways that resonate for decades. It is a story not just of battles won, but of lessons learned, of alliances strengthened, and of a path forged toward eventual victory in Europe. Thank you so much for watching this detailed journey through Operation Torch. If you enjoyed this deep dive into one of World War II's pivotal campaigns, do not forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel for more historical stories, and hit the notification bell so you never miss an update. Your support allows us to continue bringing these important stories to life, highlighting the bravery, strategy, and innovation that shaped history. We truly appreciate you joining us on this journey through time, and we hope you feel inspired by the resilience, courage, and coordination that defined Operation Torch. Now, it is time to rest and reflect on the sacrifices and triumphs of those who came before us. Good night, and may your dreams be filled with the same determination and hope that carried the Allies through the deserts of North Africa to victory.